No one saw this coming. In a jaw-dropping live broadcast, Rebecca Lamb broke her silence, and what she revealed about Joni and Doug left the entire Daystar audience frozen in disbelief. The studio went quiet, producers scrambled, and the internet erupted within minutes. Was this a slip-up, or a deliberate confession that exposes everything hidden behind Daystar's polished image? What Rebecca said on air changes everything, and there's no taking it back now. It was supposed to be just another Daystar broadcast, bright lights, polished smiles, and the same familiar routine that had played out for years. Rebecca Lamb had done this countless times before. She knew how to look calm, how to say the right words, how to keep everything picture perfect. But that day, something in her shifted. She wasn't angry or emotional, she was just done pretending. The studio felt colder than usual. Cameras rolled, the audience clapped, and Joni and Doug sat across from her, confident and smiling. To everyone watching, it looked like a family united by faith. But inside, Rebecca felt a storm building. She had carried secrets for too long, ones wrapped in silence, protected by legal papers, and hidden behind ministry image. The weight had become unbearable. As the segment went on, Joni spoke about truth, forgiveness, and God's blessings. Rebecca listened, but each word felt heavier, more hollow. Her heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear, but conviction. When the moment came for her to speak, she took a deep breath. Her voice was calm, but her words hit like thunder. For years, she said, looking straight into the camera, people have seen only what they were meant to see. But sometimes faith isn't about protecting an image, it's about facing the truth. The room fell silent. You could almost hear the hum of the lights. Joni blinked, caught off guard. Doug froze. Producers behind the cameras exchanged nervous glances. No one knew what to do. Rebecca didn't raise her voice or accuse anyone directly, but the meaning was clear. The perfect picture of the Lamb family, the unity, the harmony, the control, had cracked right there on live television. She didn't say everything that day. She didn't need to. A single sentence was enough to open the door. Viewers at home sat frozen, sensing something bigger beneath her words. And when the broadcast ended, everyone knew this wasn't just another show. It was the moment the silence broke and truth finally stepped into the light. After Marcus Lamb's passing in 2021, the atmosphere inside Daystar changed overnight. What was once a family filled with laughter, prayer, and unity suddenly felt hollow. The halls that had echoed with his booming voice and warm laughter now felt cold. The network kept running. The shows went on, the lights still glowed. But for Rebecca, nothing felt the same. Her father had been the balance, the anchor that held everyone steady. Without him, everything began to drift. Rebecca tried her best to hold it together. She showed up for work, smiled for the cameras, and did what she'd always done. Be the good daughter, the one who supported her mother, kept the peace, and stayed loyal no matter what. But behind those smiles, she was breaking. Grief has a strange way of showing up. It doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes as emptiness, confusion, or the quiet realization that the world you knew is gone. Her mother, Joni, didn't stop. She couldn't. She threw herself into the ministry, into work, into keeping Daystar alive. The cameras rolled on. The audience still expected inspiration and hope, and Joni was determined to deliver it. But the more she pushed forward, the more distance grew between her and her daughter. Rebecca understood her mother's need to stay strong, but she also saw how that strength was turning into something else: control. Everything had to stay perfect. Every detail, every word, every image had to match the brand her parents had built. Then came Dougweiss. He'd been around before, a familiar name in Christian circles, a counselor, someone the family respected. At first, Rebecca thought nothing of it when her mother started spending time with him. She assumed it was part of the healing process. Her father had only been gone a few months, and everyone grieves differently. But when photos of Joni and Doug began appearing online, smiling, holding hands, attending events together, something inside Rebecca twisted. It wasn't anger, it was grief colliding with disbelief. It felt too soon. It felt like her father's memory was being rewritten before her eyes. She wanted to understand. She wanted to talk to her mother privately, to ask what was really going on. But every conversation turned tense. Joni would brush off her concerns, reminding her that God was doing a new thing. Rebecca tried to stay respectful, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that the family's story was being edited, polished, and repackaged for the public. while the real pain was quietly buried under layers of positivity and image control. There was also the NDA. Years earlier, when Rebecca and her husband JW had taken on bigger roles at Daystar, they were asked to sign a confidentiality agreement. At the time, it seemed normal, a way to protect the ministry, but over time she realized it wasn't just about business. It was about silence. The NDA didn't just cover contracts or finances. It reached into their personal lives, warning them not to speak about anything that might damage the ministry's reputation. It was worded politely but carried a clear message: speak out, and you lose everything. At first, Rebecca justified it to herself. She told herself that silence was loyalty, that protecting her family's image was part of honoring her parents' legacy. But the longer she kept quiet, the heavier that silence became. She began noticing things that didn't align with what Daystar preached: small decisions, quiet manipulations, moments that didn't sit right in her spirit. Each time she thought about speaking up, the NDA echoed in her mind like a threat: stay quiet or lose everything. Meanwhile, the world outside saw none of this. Viewers still tuned in to see a picture-perfect family walking in faith. They saw Joni smiling beside Doug, talking about love after loss. They saw Rebecca on set occasionally, calm and collected. But behind the scenes, she was shrinking. Meetings that used to include her now went on without her. Her voice, once valued, was quietly pushed aside. She wasn't fired, but she was frozen out. The message was clear: stay quiet and stay out of the way. The grief that had once brought the family together now separated them. Rebecca would sit alone in her father's old office sometimes just to feel close to him. She'd run her fingers across his old Bible, still marked with notes and underlines, and whisper prayers that no one heard. "Dad, what would you do?" she'd ask softly. But the only answer was silence. Outside, things looked fine, even better than fine. Daystar was growing, partnerships expanding, audiences celebrating Joni's inspiring comeback. But Rebecca knew the truth. The family that preached about unity was quietly divided. The ministry that spoke about transparency was drowning in secrecy, and the daughter who had grown up under its lights was suffocating in the shadows. There were nights when she couldn't sleep. She'd replay every conversation, every decision, wondering how things had gone so wrong. The NDA sat in a drawer in her home office, a constant reminder of the invisible chains around her. She prayed for peace, but even her prayers felt trapped inside that silence. Sometimes she'd think back to her father's words he'd often said when preaching: truth and love must walk together. But now, in the family he left behind, truth and love had become strangers. The ministry spoke of forgiveness and light, but inside, everything felt dark and controlled. By late 2022, the distance between mother and daughter had become impossible to ignore. Calls grew shorter, holidays were awkward, public appearances together were rehearsed smiles hiding private wounds. Rebecca felt like she was living in two worlds, one for the cameras and one she couldn't talk about. The hardest part was realizing that her silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was only breaking her from the inside out. Still, she stayed quiet. Not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know how not to. The fear was too strong, the grief too deep, and the control too tight. It was a prison disguised as loyalty. But even then, in the darkest moments, something in her refused to die. A small, stubborn spark of truth waiting for its chance to speak. She didn't know it yet, but that spark would one day ignite everything. It was early morning in Texas, and Rebecca Lamb was sitting at her kitchen table, scrolling through the news like she always did. The world had moved on from her family's story, or at least that's what it seemed. The headlines that once carried her last name had faded, replaced by newer scandals and fresher controversies. Life was quieter now, but not peaceful. The silence still held weight. Every time she thought she had found closure, something small, a photo, a memory, a voice, would bring the ache back. That morning felt no different until she saw it. The headline read, "Texas passes Trey's law, NDAs can no longer hide abuse or misconduct." Rebecca blinked, reread it, and then read it again. Her heart started racing. For years, she had lived under the shadow of one document, the non-disclosure agreement she and her husband JW had been pressured to sign while working at Daystar. At the time, it had felt harmless, like a formality. Just standard policy, they'd said, but it hadn't been standard at all. It had been a leash. Every time she thought about speaking up, that NDA whispered in her mind like a warning, "Stay quiet or lose everything." She clicked on the article, her eyes scanning each line. Trey's law was simple but powerful. It stated that NDAs could no longer be used by religious organizations, ministries, or nonprofits to cover up abuse, misconduct, or unethical behavior. For years, churches and ministries had used legal contracts to keep people silent, to protect reputations, not truth. And now, for the first time, the law was changing that. Rebecca's hands trembled as she read. She could feel her pulse in her throat. This wasn't just news. It was the answer to the prayer she had whispered countless times. The law meant that her NDA, the one that had tied her silence to her family's reputation, was now powerless. She could speak, and no one could stop her. JW walked into the kitchen, sleepy-eyed and holding his coffee. When he saw her face, he knew something was different. "What is it?" he asked. Rebecca turned her laptop toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "Read this." He leaned in, scanning the screen. As he read, his expression changed. By the time he finished, his jaw was tight, his eyes wet. They sat there for a moment, neither speaking. The air in the room felt heavy, charged. "This changes everything," he said quietly. Rebecca nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I think it's time." That night, they sat together again at the same kitchen table. Only this time the air felt different, like something sacred was unfolding. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and between them lay a stack of papers, the old NDA. Rebecca had kept it for years, tucked away in a drawer, both a reminder and a warning. She spread it out in front of them, along with a notebook full of prayers and journal entries she had written during the darkest years. JW looked at her, his voice steady but serious. "If we do this, there's no going back. Once it's out there, you can't undo it." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I know," she said, "but I can't live like this anymore. I've been silent long enough." They prayed together, no fancy words, no rehearsed lines, just two broken hearts asking God for courage. Rebecca's voice cracked as she prayed. "Lord, I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be free. I want to walk in truth no matter what it costs." When the prayer ended, she felt something shift inside her. The fear that had clung to her for years, the fear of losing everything, of being misunderstood, of breaking her family's image, began to loosen its grip. She realized that silence wasn't faithfulness anymore. It was bondage. The next morning, Rebecca sat down at her laptop and began to write. Her fingers trembled at first, but as the words came, they flowed like water breaking through a dam. She didn't write to accuse or to attack. She wrote to tell the truth. She wrote about what it felt like to grow up under the lights of a ministry where image mattered more than honesty. She wrote about the NDA, how it had silenced her voice, and how that silence had slowly broken her spirit. She wrote about watching things happen behind closed doors that didn't match the sermons on stage. Her post wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it was honest, raw, real. When she finished, she stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. JW came and stood behind her, reading over her shoulder. He put a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Are you ready?" Rebecca took a deep breath. Yes. She pressed post. The sound of the mouse click was quiet, almost unnoticeable. But in that instant, something in her life shifted forever. For years, she had lived afraid of what would happen if the truth ever got out. Now, she wasn't afraid anymore. The weight she had carried for so long finally lifted. At first, nothing happened. She closed her laptop and went about her day. But by evening, her phone started buzzing. A few messages, then a dozen, then hundreds. By the next morning, her story was everywhere. The headlines read, "Rebecca Lamb breaks her silence. Daystar daughter speaks out." People were stunned. Supporters praised her courage. Critics accused her of betrayal. Some called it an act of faith. Others called it rebellion. But for Rebecca, it wasn't about any of that. It was about freedom. For the first time since her father's death, she felt peace. Not the kind that comes from everyone liking you, but the kind that comes when you finally stop living in fear. The law had changed the rules, yes, but more importantly, it had given her the chance to reclaim her voice, to step out from behind the shadow of silence and stand in the light. And when the storm hit, the interviews, the backlash, the endless noise, she stood firm, because she knew something the headlines didn't. This wasn't about scandal or revenge. This was about obedience, about truth, about a woman finally brave enough to say, "Enough." The law had opened the door. but it was Rebecca who walked through it, and once she did, nothing in her world would ever be the same again. When Rebecca Lamb pressed post, she had no idea what was about to happen. She didn't expect it to go viral. She didn't expect people to pick sides. She didn't expect the headlines, the chaos, or the flood of attention that would crash into her life within hours. All she wanted was to breathe again, to tell the truth, to stop hiding. But truth has a way of setting things on fire before it sets you free. At first, it was quiet. For a few hours, her post just sat there, a heartfelt confession in a corner of the internet. It was simple, raw, and deeply human. She didn't point fingers or attack anyone by name. She just told her story about being silenced, about the pain of keeping secrets, about how the law had finally given her the courage to speak. But by that evening, something started to shift. Someone shared her post on Twitter, then another, then a Christian news page picked it up. By the next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her inbox was full of messages, hundreds of them. Some were kind, full of encouragement and prayers. Others were harsh, filled with accusations. You're brave. You're bitter. You're a hero. You're a traitor. Every message pulled her heart in a different direction. She tried to stay calm, tried to remember why she had spoken in the first place. But it was hard. The internet didn't care about nuance. It wanted drama. It wanted a villain. And depending on who you asked, that villain was either her or her mother. Inside Daystar, panic spread fast. Rebecca's post hit the ministry like a lightning strike. The board called emergency meetings. Phone lines were jammed with calls from donors demanding answers. Employees whispered in hallways, unsure what to believe. Some supported Rebecca quietly, sending her private texts that said, "We're praying for you. Thank you for being brave." Others distanced themselves completely, terrified of losing their jobs or being seen as disloyal. Then came the headlines. Daystar daughter breaks her silence. Rebecca Lamb exposes family secrets. Faith Network faces reckoning. For the first time, the Lamb family, one of the most recognized names in Christian television, was no longer being covered for their sermons, but for their scandal. Rebecca didn't read most of it. She couldn't. Every headline felt like a knife, twisting her story into something she hadn't meant it to be. She hadn't wanted revenge. She hadn't wanted to hurt her mother or destroy the ministry her father built. She just wanted the truth to stop being treated like a threat. But Joni didn't see it that way. When the story broke, Rebecca tried calling her. She just wanted to talk, to explain, to tell her that this wasn't an attack. But the call went unanswered. Hours later, a text came through. 4 words that felt colder than any silence. "I'm praying for you." No anger, no warmth, just distance. Rebecca stared at the screen until her vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to cry, to make her mother understand. But deep down, she knew this moment had been coming for a long time. The truth had finally drawn the line between them. The following weeks were chaos. Reporters showed up outside her house. Old family friends stopped calling. Church invitations disappeared. Even people who had once told her they admired her father's teachings now seemed to look at her like she'd done something wrong. She became the daughter who turned on her mother, the whistleblower, the rebel. But amid the noise, something beautiful began to happen. Quietly, messages started to pour in from people she had never met. Men, women, even ministry workers from other churches and networks. They shared their own stories of being silenced, manipulated, or forced to sign NDAs that kept them from telling the truth. Some had been hiding their pain for years. "You gave me courage," one woman wrote. "I thought I was alone." Rebecca cried reading those messages. For the first time, she realized that what she had done wasn't just about her family. It was about so many others who had been trapped in the same cycle of silence and fear. Her story had cracked something open, and light was finally starting to pour through. Still, freedom came at a cost. Her relationship with her mother remained broken. She missed her, not the public figure everyone saw on screen, but her mom. The woman who used to hold her hand during storms, who prayed over her before big moments. Now, every memory felt like a ghost. The family dinners were gone. The laughter was gone. Even her siblings seemed unsure of where to stand. There were nights when Rebecca sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through old photos, her father smiling beside her, her mother's arm around her, all of them together on set. She'd whisper to the empty room, "Dad, I hope I made you proud." And somehow, in her heart, she knew he would have understood. JW, her husband, was her anchor through it all. When the noise got too loud, he reminded her why she had done this. "Truth always divides before it heals," he would say softly, "but healing will come." Together, they prayed every night, not for vindication, but for peace, for their family, for everyone caught in the storm. Slowly, Rebecca began to reclaim her life. She stopped reading comments. She stopped explaining herself. She started focusing on what really mattered: her faith, her marriage, her peace. The fame, the stage, the image, none of it mattered anymore. She had spent years performing for cameras. Now, she wanted to live for truth. She began writing again, small devotionals, quiet reflections about faith and healing, not for an audience, just for herself. She shared a few online, and to her surprise, people responded, not with gossip or judgment, but gratitude. They said her words helped them heal, that they saw God's grace in her story. And slowly, the narrative began to shift. Rebecca was no longer just the one who broke the silence. She was becoming a voice for others who couldn't speak yet. Months passed. The noise faded. The headlines moved on. Life grew quiet again. But this time, it was a different kind of quiet. Not fear, but freedom. Rebecca started to smile again. Real smiles, the kind that reach your eyes. She spent more time outdoors, walking, praying, breathing in the peace she'd fought so hard to find. Sometimes she still missed her old life. The big productions, the shared prayers before filming, the way her father's voice used to fill a room. But she also knew she could never go back. The truth had changed her. The silence that once held her captive had been broken, and she wasn't going to let anyone put her back in that box. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Rebecca sat on her porch with JW, holding a cup of tea. The sky was painted in gold and pink. For a long time, they didn't say anything. Then JW looked at her and smiled. "You realize what you did, right? You started something. You set people free." Rebecca looked out at the fading light, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean to start anything," she said softly. "I just wanted to tell the truth." JW squeezed her hand. That's exactly how freedom starts. In that moment, Rebecca understood something her father had always preached, but she had never fully grasped until now. Truth doesn't destroy faith. It refines it. It burns away the pretense, the fear, the control, until all that's left is what's real. She still didn't know what the future would hold, whether she and her mother would ever reconcile, whether Daystar would ever face its reckoning, or whether the movement her words inspired would keep growing. But one thing she knew for sure: she was free. And for the first time in years, that was enough.